AFL High Performance Podcast. My name is Jack McLean, and today I'm lucky enough to have Brett Smith as my guest. Today we'll be discussing everything that you need to know that comes to tactical periodisation for field team sports. Welcome, Brett. Thanks for jumping on, mate.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
No doubt the rugby population, mate, and physiology will be well aware of your background that are tuning in. But for the athletes, maybe parents of athletes or coaches alike that aren't aware, do you mind, I guess, providing where it all started for you, your passion for high performance and tactical periodisation, and then different roles you've had along your journey so far?
Yeah, I actually I played a bit of league when I was young, and a little bit of union and a little bit of league, but main sport was actually rowing, and that's I guess where I got into high performance sport. I worked with some club rowing coaches, and then ended up working with the national rowing team as their sports scientist. And at the same time, I worked with New Zealand cycling, New Zealand triathlon, did a little bit of work with New Zealand swimming, but mainly those endurance sports. And at the same time, I'd done my master's and my PhD, and was working as an academic. So I was sort of working as an academic, but embedded in a lot of those national teams, primarily New Zealand rowing, with a guy called Richard Tonks, who you've probably never heard of, but in the rowing fraternity, he's pretty famous for basically turning New Zealand rowing around. I think we're like 35th in the world when he took over the coaching, and then we ended up in the top 2 or 3 from there on in. And yeah, so I was working at the university and working consultancy work with New Zealand rowing, and that took up a good decade or so. And funny enough, I was doing a presentation around GPS. Basically, I built a GPS, not by myself, but in collaboration, and put it in a boat. And we'd sort of developed a bit of a training model based on boat speed. Richard Tonks is the, I guess, major supporter of that. So I was in that that great sports science situation where you're doing research and finding things out live, and the head coach is engaging with that. And we were, finding stuff out and implementing it, and finding stuff out and implementing it. It was just like a massive experiment, but it went really well. Got good results. I was at a conference and I presented my findings, and Wayne Smith, who most rugby people will know, the famous rugby coach, he was in there, and he come up to me afterwards and says, "Do you think this would work in rugby?" And I says, "I'm not sure, but people often say that." And then anyway, the head of performance for the Chiefs, because he was with the Chiefs rugby, he rang me up, a great man, Phil Healy. And I sort of thought, again, okay, it's just one of those once a phone calls. But then he called back, and then we had lunch together, Phil and and I've worked with him ever since. So that was I didn't move into rugby till probably started with the Chiefs in 2012. So the whole rugby thing's been pretty recent. Worked with the Chiefs, did pretty well there. A whole lot of us then moved to the Blues. So it went pretty well there. But I had a great experience there, because Dave Rennie was the head coach, Wayne Smith, Tom Coventry, and Andrew Strawbridge, and all the rugby union. People who know rugby union will know those 4 men, and that was a unique environment because they're all school teachers, and they were very open-minded to practical innovation. So we created in the Chiefs, we created a huge innovation factory. I had PhD students there, master students there. We come up with something we called a knowledge and innovation committee. So at the review of at the end of each season, the coaches would sit down and talk about things that they thought we were deficient in. And my role was to go and say, find an expert, or commission a report, or get a postgrad student in to do that work. So a lot of those postgrad students were actually working alongside coaches, the medical staff, or the S&C staff. So it was a very embedded role. I call them a studentship. And it went really, really, really well. And I guess the really interesting thing was because I was an academic and I was trying to feed my students into those R&D programs. A lot of the best students were women, but back in those days, you didn't have women in professional sport. So again, hats off to Phil and to the Chiefs. They allowed a couple of women in to do research, and they did really well. And when I left, there was actually more women in doing research with the organisation. There was guys. So yeah, it was a pretty unique time. So yeah, Wayne Smith then went on to other jobs, other roles, and he took me along with him. And Phil Healy then went on to other roles and took me alongside him. Worked, God, and Blair Mills obviously. So Millsy was with us at the Chiefs, and he took me on and got me involved in other roles. So I'm trying to remember, to be honest, mate. So I've been working in Kobe with the Kobe Steelers, a few other little bits and pieces over there, and the US with New York. I know they're not around anymore, but had some pretty good results there. Worked with the Italian team in the 2019 Rugby World Cup as the external sports scientist. The New Zealand Sevens, so worked with the All Blacks and the Black Fern Sevens into Tokyo, and that went pretty well. Yeah, I've had, I went to the Olympics with the Australian rowing team in 2021 and got stuck in Australia. So did a stint with the Brumbies, which I really enjoyed. I mean, they were, I basically got locked out of New Zealand and stuck over there. And, they cold called me to check if I was okay and, and provide me space to work. So I spent months, I got back the next year, basically. So we had the Super Rugby final in 2021, which we won, the Trans-Tasman Super Rugby final. 5 o'clock that morning, I jumped on a plane to go to the Olympics with the Australian rowing team and got back the next year. Yeah, wow. And,
Right.
if you want a bit of a plug, just the Brumbies. I mean, they found out. I think one of the guys at the Blues said, "Hey, look, one of our guys is stuck in Canberra," and they just cold called me and said, "Are you all right?" And I says, "Well, I just need somewhere to work because it was a lockdown." So I got a pass to be part of their team and bought a bike. Well, I borrowed a bike off one of the rowing coaches and just biked up from Yarra. We were, just biked up to the Brumbies and come a second home. So yeah, hats off to those guys. Yeah. Yeah, but I carried on working in rowing as well too. I did a little bit of work with a Chinese team and a Swiss rowing team, and then obviously got embedded in the Australian rowing team. Still working in rugby, sort of a week or a couple of weeks in Australia and 3 or 4 weeks in New Zealand, and sort of back and forth, and with the European campaigns and World Cups and things like that. So yeah, it's an interesting time. So yeah, it's still kept involved in the rowing. Yeah, so with the GB Women's Rowing Program at the moment, I just moved from the Blues last season and have been with Moana Pacifica this season. Obviously with you and at the Eels this season as well, and do a little bits and pieces. Still working with Kobe in Japan, and yeah. And I guess the final thing is I'm involved in coach education with High Performance Sport New Zealand. So I do probably 10 sessions, 10 3-day sessions a year with coaches here in New Zealand. It's a very good program. And basically, it was the brainchild of a couple of good people in High Performance Sport New Zealand, and what they wanted to do was upskill the head coaches so they could be part of the decision making in all the areas of the operation, return to play, medical, nutrition, psychology, conditioning. So I'm one of the people who work with coaches around that sort of knowledge base around the S&C. Yeah.
And was there a particular sort of penny drop moment in any of these organisations where you're quite clear on, your approach to date in terms of, tactical periodisation, where you really saw the effectiveness of it? Like you said, you've had some good results, great results across these programs in world-class programs. What was the moment where you're like, yeah, this is I'm willing to die on a hill, over this approach, how effective it is?
Well, I think it started in rowing. because I first started working in rowing with Harry Mann, and again, the rowing community will know of Harry, and he was one of those unique guys who was an expert in everything. So I had to, often in the rugby environment, you come and you take over the S&C area, in rowing, a lot of the coaches you work with, that they've got decades of applied and sometimes theoretical knowledge around the conditioning space. So when I went into Harry's program and then into Dick Tonk's program, a lot of it was collaborations around best practice, So what I brought to it as a scientist was, I guess, the ability to innovate it with best practice sport scientific knowledge, and often they'd done a bit of reading in that space, but they were more around the applied area. So, you had to really know your stuff to be able to argue your case that if you felt that something should be done differently. And the only way I could do that was basically to develop the program for the whole year. So I had to have the whole season planned out, backwards from the world champs, even because we would often write 4-year programs from the Olympics back. So you'd have to develop your program and you'd have to know what they were trying to achieve in their elements around the skills and the techniques and things like that. And I guess decision making and racing and blah, blah, blah. It's not as complicated as rugby and a lot of the team sports, but there still is a level of complication there. So I had to conceptually understand the whole season or all the bits fitted, if you know what I mean. Because then what I needed to do is I needed to be able to debate and persuade the coaches around things that I thought needed to be changed. And sometimes I'd lose that discussion and because there was context that I perhaps missed. So then I needed to make sure that I had the monitoring tools in place to monitor what was going on. And sometimes I was right, sometimes we were wrong. So sometimes midstream we'd go, okay, this intervention didn't work. So we run that mesocycle out and then we would change in the next mesocycle. So having to be really well planned and understand all the elements that were part of your periodization plan, because I needed to discuss them. Because in a rowing program, you'll have the head coach. So I work very closely with the head coach. And I kid you not, we would sometimes literally 3 days from dawn to dusk talk training. 3 days. And we did that on numerous times. You'd wake up in the morning and you'd talk training. It'd be on a whiteboard or whatever. Sometimes if we were overseas, we'd use a window, whiteboard markers on a window. So we could, he wanted to see the thing, and we'd just draw, I'd have to draw out my plan and then we'd back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And that just prepared me, I think, because my philosophy from there was to work with the coach, to understand what the coach required in terms of, when you're in rugby, there's tactics, there's technique, there's decision making, there's contact, the RTP, all of these elements that have to weave in together around your conditioning program. You know what I mean? So I could come in and bludgeon the coaches, go, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. The old, remember old style where coaches would have 10 minutes, then I'd run them around in circles for 5 minutes, and the coaches would have 10 minutes, then I'd run them up the hill for 5 minutes, and the coaches have 10 minutes and have them hidden tackle bags for 5 minutes. I really wanted to integrate, like the rowers do, integrate the conditioning with, specificity principles. So we were achieving our tactical goals or our technical goals or, our anaerobic development or a speed or a power development in the water, and it was on the water, sorry, and it was periodized properly so that, we had a good rhythm to our microcycle, and our mesocycles were achieving their goals, and we're getting progressive overload, all the scientific principles, but I was doing it in partnership with coaches, and that's pretty powerful because it's not me going into the room with Wayne Smith, for example, one of the things we did with Kobe is we changed. We had a student, Morgan Hartman, did this really cool research project. She actually did a couple of them, and I presented the results, and they said, yeah, okay, we're going to change the whole way we train, which is pretty big, isn't it? We're going to not just the pre-season, we're going to change the in-season, we're going to change that. And I worked back and forth for the coaches, and Smithy presented that to the team. So there was no battle on my behalf. I didn't have to persuade, because the head coach, he was the head of performance. The coaching coordinator, he'd brought in all the coaches, so they sold what the changes of what we're trying to do and why we're trying to do it and things like that. And we did some of the senior players would come to me for a little bit of technical update about small little bits, but the coaches were and you get coaches involved in believing in change, then a lot of the battles won. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
So yeah, that kind of
Definitely.
time, I guess I had that pretty unique experience in that I really had to understand good, solid planning and good comms and pedagogy, good teaching for the coaches. Yeah.
And what are for coaches and scientists, both tactical coaches, but strength and conditioning coaches, high performance managers, sports scientists that are interested in applying this model, and perhaps they're applying 70% of it, but and they're looking to check like we did with Wayne. What are some teething sort of common mistakes when strength and conditioning coaches and coaches are coming together?
I'm not going to say this is easy. It's difficult. So I guess the fundamental thing is that with the rowing program, specificity principle was really, really important. So we did the majority of our work on the water, and we did a little bit of work on the erg. And Dick was really big around the weight training, being all about making the boat go faster. In fact, that was his thing. We would have we'd be in day one, and he'd go, "How's this going to make the boat go faster?" Everything was about making the boat go faster. So when I went into the Chiefs, they wanted to implement a whole different way of training, and all four coaches were 100% into this. There was no chinks in the armor, because I wasn't. I was a little bit surprised when I first did, and when they explained what they wanted to do. So they basically wanted to start from pre-season to the end of the season. It was coach-led conditioning, obviously with us supporting it, but everything was with the ball in hand. So every conditioning drill we did had to have a technical, tactical decision-making goal. Obviously, we're looking at contact in some of them as well too, a learning development and a conditioning element. Yeah. So as you know, I mean, you've been working in this field as long as I have. That's challenging, because it's not pure. You know what I mean? If I want to go out and I want to do a density session or an intensity session or an alactic session or whatever, or a speed power session, without the ball, I can make it pure. I can have the GPS hooked up or timing lights, and I can go, okay, we achieved 90% or 85% and things like that. It's control. We call it red line running, basically running on the red line. Whereas if I go into game-based conditioning, I've got to have the coaches understand what intensity is. What is density? Are we doing worst case scenario today? Right? So I might have a coach that's doing a transition drill or an offense drill or a defense drill, but I want a particular type of physiological overload for that part of the session, for that part of the day. So there's a lot of interactive work around enabling the coach to achieve their goals, technical decision making, shape, and me achieving my goal, or the conditioning staff achieving their goal, and that's hard work. So often it's easier just to go, okay, look, you give me 5 minutes and I'll go and work them on the hill, or I'll go and work them in a set of cones, or I'll do this, or I'll do a power primer, and then we'll run into a 10-meter excels or something like that. But building those into a drill is challenging. And what I've found is that with those unique coaches I'd have, Ren's, Smithy, Tom Coventry, and Andrew Strawbridge. I mean, they were driving it, so it was really easy. The other organisations that I've been into, a lot of it is getting them to understand that they don't step back from when we're doing this drill, because they're front and centre, because they may be actually running, they may be coaching or running that particular drill. And my role is to say, hey, look, set them up. This is going to look like this. We need, the Blues, we developed this thing called maps at speed, and in Kobe they call it tamhagane. And basically it's like a what I call a lactate production set. So you're doing 30 to 45 seconds on, and then you're having a couple of minutes off. So that 30 to 45 minutes on, you want to be up 20 plus lactate. You need to be moving, really, really shunting. So how do you run a drill that looks like that? Well, I don't know. So what we did was, one of my students, that was part of her project, she was identifying all of the drills in a game and what they looked like. What does a 5-phase play look like in a game where everyone's through the roof? Well, this is what it looks like. So we do that, we make a drill out of it, and we run that drill. And the coaches have got to understand that it's that quick. The ball's probably going to go to ground, so we've got to be feeding balls on.
Yeah.
I mean, the guys are clever. They work out 10 seconds of the drill, they drop the ball, everything slows down. So there's educating the players so they're skillful enough to do that sort of stuff, and the coaches, to be around feeding the players. And the classic example for me was the Black Ferns, when Wayne Smith took over the Black Ferns. Though the Sevens girls could catch and pass, because they were professionals, but a lot of those other girls were just amateurs. So those poor women, I've never seen a team train so hard. He would have lines and lines of balls, and they would just run, and everything was just flat out. And it was all with the ball. And I kid you not, I watched one of their training, and they were literally 15v15 for an hour, and it was just on the go. And it was all, they would do a block and then a rest and a block and a rest and a block, and then they'd come together, and then they would change the nature of training. So they might start off some offensive, and then some offense to transition to defense and deep exits, but it was all just at match-based speed, and they definitely got the conditioning. I don't know if you've watched the rugby ball, because that team hadn't been doing well, and then they won it, but they won all of the matches just holding on for their life in the last 10 to 15 minutes. Like, they developed optimal levels of conditioning, all with the ball in hand. And the Blackfin Sevens did that as well too in Tokyo. So again, it's the challenge. Going back to your question, the biggest challenge is this. Only way this works is if the coaches buy into it and then have the skills to collaborate around achieving all of our goals in each element of training, and that doesn't happen overnight. That's a journey.
Process.
It's a process.
Yep.
And sometimes, I always say most changes take 3 years. If you look at the Blues from when we come in, the Blues not doing too well till we were started to be at the top end of the table, took 3 years. Occasionally things happen in 1 year, but typically, and from my experience in all the programs I've worked, it typically takes 3 years. Because part of it's with this, combined periodization. It takes a while for everyone to learn their parts.
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense. And going back to your career, what about highlights that you sort of look back on fondly that you're most proud of?
Look, I've just been so lucky. I really have. I've just been right place at the right time. I just overwhelmed. I mean, that's why I keep doing it. Like in 2021, the Blues had won the Trans-Tasman, the first super title they'd won for a long, long time, And then I went to the Olympics, and, we won 4 medals. And Australia got, finished second overall in terms of rowing nations. And then I worked remotely with the Waikato NPC team, and they won for the first time. And I honestly, when I finally got back to New Zealand, because I guess I wasn't in a good headspace having to spend so much time away from home, I thought, oh, I'll just go back to academia and give it all up. But it's the ultimate high, isn't it? Sport, like, sometimes you just think, God, how do I get paid? How do you get paid for this? Like you're getting paid to do your hobby. Hey, there's probably not too many jobs like that. The only problem is you get the ultimate highs, then you get the ultimate lows. And I really did think about that. I had a good think about it for probably, quite a few months. Then I just thought, oh, I can't let that go. But yeah, look, I did just too many memories, there's nothing better than a Super Rugby final, winning a Super Rugby final and going on into the medal ceremony and the crowd and rowing and, just the men and women achieving their goals and gold medals and things like that. But yeah, that's a really good question. I know this sounds funny, but no one's ever asked me that question. Um, Maybe I'll think about that.
Yeah,
But yeah,
no.
like just
Yeah.
whole lot of yeah, great memories. Oh, good question. I guess every now and again you get a player that shouldn't be there. Like too small. They didn't make the teams through the ranks, and they come in and they do something amazing, and that's you know now that you've asked me, I think I won't mention any names, but there's just been a few people that just fought all the odds to achieve amazing things, and that's bloody good motivation,
Mm,
Yeah.
100%. No, well said. And on the flip side, obviously in high performance sport, comes pressure, and on the daily to push boundaries and prepare players to be their best and perform at their best. What have been some of the biggest challenges you faced, and what did you learn
Well,
from those challenges?
that's another very good question. So look, when I did my PhD, I did it with New Zealand rowing team, and I worked with a very good sports psychologist, and he said, just joking, he says, "Oh, I've got this tool. It's a psychometric tool, and we're gonna. I want you to run that alongside all of your measures." So we were doing hormone measures, protein damage markers, and we also had a suite of cytokines. So we were pretty heavy duty monitoring, and Dick Tonks allowed me to do it with the rowers right through to the Olympics. So we were taking blood of them. It's just amazing what they enabled us to do as they were preparing for the biggest event of their lives. But anyway, after when we collected the first set of data, it didn't work out as he had expected, and he was pretty down about it. And anyway, we come together, had a good chat, and he says, "Look, this is what should have happened, and the opposites occurred." And I says, "Well, for me, it doesn't really matter because, like I understand how to use the data. That's something you've got to get your head around." But he says, no, I need to understand what's. So he went away and did personality testing on all of the athletes. So just really brief summary of a long period of work. What we found is that a lot of our champions, they were surviving things that perhaps they shouldn't have survived, like all the hormones were going the wrong way. And we were really under pressure to pull back on training and do these things. But then they'd break a world record or they'd win a gold medal at that Olympics or things like that. Whereas the athletes that were presenting themselves with normal profiles for protein damage and inflammation and cortisol, testosterone, and all these other things, they weren't achieving. So anyway, as part of my thesis, I just talked about maybe what in a high performance sport, we're taking people who are abnormal. In other words, they're on the far end of the bell curve. All right. So you've got bell curve. You've got normal people physiologically, and we don't get them in high performance sport. We get people who come in gifted, and then through the training and things like we do, we make them even more abnormal. And then the people that are successful are even more abnormal. So he said, well, I wonder how their personality goes with this. So he did a lot of personality profiles on them and found that they scored, not all of them, but a number of them scored high for psychopathy and things like that. Yep. And because I was really interested in this, so we did a lot more work around that. And we found that that's quite common in business, in the armed forces, and people are under stress. It's quite normal. So when I presented this, because I presented it to our coaches, it was like a light went off on coaches. They're going, because at the moment we're getting rid of people who don't fit. We should be embracing those people who don't fit. You know what I mean? So we changed our policy. So we went searching for that kid that didn't quite fit, because we wanted to take these abnormal people normal. So what impact did it have on me? Well, when I go into a sports team and it's tough, and I've got coaches behaving, in a particular way, and senior players behaving in a particular way, for me that's like oh, thank God. You know what I mean? When you first go into sport, you meet that person and you've idolized them, and you realize that, okay, this is a very difficult character. And you go, oh, for me, I know if I get someone who's really, really good and everything's fine, then that's good. But I expect those types of things. And I expect when we get to critical areas of the season, I know that those people are going to behave in a particular way because I expect that. So I never get surprised, and I've had, God, there's so many stories I've got where, I know what my role is. My role is to challenge them, and you get someone who's a very famous, well-known, high performance athlete, and my role is to tell them, I think what you're doing is wrong. You know what I mean? And I know how they're going to behave to that. So I don't go and go, oh God, I hope this doesn't happen. I know when I present this to this player, he's going to get upset and angry, and I expect that to happen. And that's just normal. Let's find a solution for that. And I think that's probably why I think I've done okay in this business and survived in this business. I don't judge people against. I guess I don't know. Does it sound right? I accept people for what they are. You know what I mean? I accept all parts of the puzzle, all parts of their personality. Yeah.
Yeah. Embrace the different. I like that. That's good.
Yeah, and in fact,
Great message.
yeah, and so like I think if you're going to work in this space, so look,
Especially high performance environment.
Yeah,
it's not going to feel good all the time.
Yeah, and I think that's for me. You say what are the negatives and things like that. Like I've had, I wouldn't say battles, but I've had disagreements with senior players, but I don't see that as a negative. You know what I mean? I don't look at that and go, oh, that was, that was a bit of a battle to get them for us to see eye to eye, and that's a bad thing. I mean, that's what I signed up for.
It's almost like you said, that's it's almost a good barometer that we're onto something here. We've got the people that we need to take us to the promised land.
I think so.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Thanks for sharing that, Brett. We'll dive back into the topic, mate, of choice. When it comes to the science side of things and using scientific principles, but also like you mentioned, that the art of being agile with the coaches and understanding context and how that matters, and no doubt the athletes' feedback as well. What are some things that you sort of hold strongly to yourself where you think, oh, from a physical point of view, we're going in the wrong direction here? It's starting to get, especially pre-season, I guess, where the physical side of things are trying to develop certain capacities to support the game model. Is that GPS? Is it leaders' feedback? Is it the coaches? Is it vision? Is it some reporting that you have, like you said, with students looking across things? How do you sort of monitor whether you're on track?
Yeah, look, I think in terms of designing your periodization model, probably the big difference I've found working in team sports is that like every moment counts. You know what I mean? With rowing, because they do so much training, you can lose a bit of time here and there, but We have matches every weekend. We have limited windows for conditioning. So we've got to be really on the ball and make sure we get the most that we can out of every session's important. It's not like a rower who's doing 12 on the water sessions and 3 weight training sessions and 2 erg sessions, so you can let one go. With rugby, it's not like that. Just for me, rugby union and rugby league is, arguably there's a big anaerobic, conditioning element there. So it's important. You only get a certain amount of anaerobic work you can do in a week. So to my mind, it's important that we use those anaerobic credits, anaerobic training credits, to achieve all our goals, which is, again, just harking back to what I said before, the technical, the tactical, the decision making, all the things that the coaches want to do. Wayne Smith talks about Zoom Crew Zoom, speed, chaos, fatigue. So what we're trying to do is bring those elements with the ball, heads up conditioning. Yeah. So it's finding, it's about periodizing those into the week, so we get those key conditioning limits. So when I first went into union, I felt that we were front loading the season. So we did a hell of a lot of work in the pre-season, and then we basically deconditioned during the season. And I listened to one of the PhD students before me present his data, and it just showed a downward trend. So when I ended up in rugby, I felt that we could perhaps pull the pre-season down, just get enough credits, but making sure that we're loading, unloading, loading, unloading, loading, unload. It's pretty flat. It's only we're just creeping up. But what we're trying to do is make sure that we're in good nick for the finals. So I guess the coaches I work with sort of bought into that. So I think it was 2013 when we won the Super Rugby title. We did our biggest training week the week before the semi-final. That was the biggest training week. And I had the group of my students who are doing RPEs for the players after every training session. We were doing McLean's wellness questionnaire that was embedded into the program. And all of the wellness showed normal, absolutely normal. And I felt, we won that final, which was good. But I felt what we'd done is that we'd stepped up the fitness so that we could do more load as the season went on. And I'm not talking crazy increases. I'm just talking about creeping the load up and the opportunities that you have. So I know that's a little bit controversial. And at Kobe, we won at Kobe for 2-3 seasons doing that type of loading model. So I think if we want to prepare ourselves for the final, we've got to be working back from the final rather than programming from left to right. We've got to program from right to left. We've got to go, where do we want to be in the final, right? So you might taper 2 weeks before that. You go, okay, this is where I want to be. I want to be doing this amount of distance, this amount of high metabolic load, this amount of intensive acceleration, this amount of distance above 85% or 93% or whatever. That's where I want us to be. And then you build the program back for that and look for the opportunities to load, knowing that, we have, I know there are special individuals where you can just keep loading and loading and loading week after week, but most athletes, because of stagnation or whatever, we don't know what the reason is. We need to load them 3 up and 1 down, or maybe 5 up, 1 down at the most. We need to have that loading, and we need to have that unloading. So I'm working backwards from the finals, going where I want to be, and then I'm programming backwards from there, using the opportunities to have that 2 weeks up, 1 week down, and maybe 5 weeks up, 1 week down. Typically, I wouldn't do 5 and 1 at the end of the season. I'd be looking at 3 and 1, 3 weeks up, 1 week down. So again, you're thinking about where you want to be at the finals, and you're building back from there. So then, I guess that's my goal, and the coaches need to understand that, and they need to buy into it, because we need to sell it to the senior leaders group, and then if you do that and it works, then it just by osmosis the new players will come in, will buy into it. But if you don't, then it gets hard. So I think in terms of the philosophy, that would probably be my periodization philosophy, not programming from left to right, not from the preseason into the final, looking at what you want to achieve, had a shared vision, what you want to achieve in the finals, and then work back from that. And then I know, again, this is a little bit controversial. The preseason, I've talked to some of my colleagues, and they go, if we do a big preseason, we just hold on to that. And there is some physiological evidence to show if we're having one big hit a week and we're in maintenance mode, we can possibly hold on to that. But I just put my rowing hat on, and I know that's a recipe for disaster. Like in rowing, if we did a massive preseason and just went in maintenance mode through the season, when we got to the Olympics, we'd be out the back door. And rugby players are still athletes. They've got to be in good nick. It's not like rowers and rugby players are totally different. And in my time in other sports, cycling and things like that, it's just that's the struggle that I've had, is do a big preseason and go into maintenance mode. I think we need to find ways of having a good preseason, but getting the boys to creep the load up. And I know, especially in NRL, the season's really long. And I'm not talking about a massive trajectory. I'm just talking about load, unload, load. Even if you flat load, then pick it up for the end. I think it's important, again, that we're looking at what we want to achieve back. So the key for that for me is obviously the GPS metrics. I guess we've talked about this, Jack. I've done a hell of a lot of research under Wayne Smith's and Phil Healy's sort of pressure as what does quality training look like. So we've spent a lot of time not just going, this is the amount of distance you're trying to achieve, or distance per minute, or high meters per minute, or whatever, trying to determine what this notion of quality training looks like. And that's too big to talk about now, but I've spent a decade on that and had PhD students and master students working on that. I think we're getting close, but we have we look at the quality of the effort as well too. And I want that quality. I'm looking at what's happening with the team quality of the individual and the team quality of work as we go through those blocks as well.
And going back to the anaerobic credits, what would be your metrics of the philosophy? What you said about priming to building up towards that finals, knowing that from a psychological, physical point of view, the best of the best respond well to stress, and that's what you're doing. You're putting stress into them to come up to get that result. So you can see how this is all fit together, the science of the art side of things. But how do you measure the anaerobic credits? What exactly is that from a GPS point of view?
Yeah, look, it's a difficult one. And when I was working in Italy, I know they were doing a lot of work about individualizing their metabolic measures, so that they knew how much time that they were spending in anaerobic, in the anaerobic zone, or the VO2 max zone, and we know that there's only a certain amount of time that you can spend in those zones. But the teams that I've worked with, the coaches don't want to reward someone who's at 100%, but is out the back of the field, or is not in the defensive line. They want to measure like for like, if you know what I mean. It's the old rowing prognostic model. They want to measure everyone against the same standards. So I use a lot of my zones, apart from 85%, 93% of distance at 83 and 93% max velocity. Most of the metrics I use are absolutes. So high metabolic load is 25.5 watts per kilogram. I have an intensive acceleration metric that's 50 watts per kilogram, which is equivalent to 3 meters per second from a standing start, or roughly 10.6 meters per second. So those metrics are pretty key for me. And again, I've done a hell of a lot of work around that. And if people are interested, I'm happy to share that with them. But those are my key metrics. And then I've got my quality metrics alongside there. So what I'm trying to make sure is that we achieve a particular level of those metrics and a particular number of minutes of quality in our bigger weeks, and then that gets less in our lesser weeks, if you know what I mean. So the percentage quality might be the same, but the volume of quality will increase, you know. So that's, and so you know, I'll set up my program. So we'll go load, 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 unload, load, 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 unload. And then it's about the microcycle or the week structure. So it's about, okay, so how do we achieve the microcycle goal with our week structure? And look, mate, we've played around with whole lots of like different ways, but at the moment in the preseason, what we found work is the Monday's an intensity focused day. So that's, you know, that's, I guess, your lactate production sets. So that might be 30 to 40 seconds on and a couple of minutes off. So you're trying to produce high levels of lactate. And you won't do much of that, you know, and that will be part of training. All the other elements, and you'll have aerobic stuff going on there as well too, and you'll do that early, and you'll get, you know, have a good primer into that, and you'll have that lactate production set, and that will be under pressure because it's no good going flat out if you can't catch and pass the ball. So there's obviously a development till we get to there, but that's the Monday, and then the Tuesday is, I guess, more of a density focus. So arguably that's more of a lactate tolerance, maybe anaerobic threshold lactate tolerance focus. So that's a bigger volume day. So for example, rugby union, the ball and play is typically 30 seconds something. It's about a minute 15 off. Traditionally, New Zealand rugby teams would do 4-minute blocks of conditioning. One of the things that we found is that we weren't preparing for what the game involved. So we switched the way we trained. So we had those really intensive intervals and the rest period, intensive intervals and rest periods. And then on the Tuesday, day 2, we do more density. So that might be worst case scenario. So it might be 3.5 minutes on, 2 minutes off, 3.5 minutes on, 2 minutes off. It's more of that sort of aerobic focus. And then Thursday and Friday would just basically replicate Monday and Tuesday. It's just we drop the volume back a little bit for those days. We would have a green session on Wednesday, which is typically off feet, so they would just spin legs and things like that. If we did dojo, the dojo would be on the Tuesday and the Friday with the density days, so that we can, you know, focus that intensity on the Mondays and Thursday. The other thing as well too is that, because remember, the key to rugby conditioning is microdosing your load, because we have to put strength in with endurance, you know, and we know that we get interference between the two of those. So I would typically go on the Tuesdays and Thursdays. I'd have a little power or strength hit in there as well. I shouldn't say little, we'd do a power and strength hit in there as well too. So we're getting all of those damaging sessions on the Mondays and Thursdays, and the Tuesdays and the Fridays are the density, maybe worst case scenario, more endurance, and we can get through those with some neural fatigue, you know. So that's the preseason. During the in-season, again, we played around with the 3 days on, 1 day off, a big captain's run and match, and in union we found that it didn't work, because we sometimes we want 2 good sessions during the week. So day 1 would typically be an active recovery session, a top up for anything we missed in a match. And then Tuesday would be a bigger day. Then we have a Wednesday off or green session, you know, spinning the legs, active recovery, depending how the guys went through that first 2 days. And on Thursday, we'd do a moderate session, which is game specific. So it'll be mapped up around the game. So how we wanted to play what game, what that looked like. And then the captain's run would be pretty small and we play the game, right? So the problem with 3 days in a row is that you can't really load day 1 because there's still fatigue from the match, all right? And it gets pretty difficult doing 2 big days back to back on the Tuesdays and Wednesdays. I feel it. We need to get recovery to get quality, you know, and fit principles would argue that if we're going to be doing anaerobic intensive work, we need 48 to 72 hours recovery. So if I go Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I'm breaking a lot of rules there, you know? Whereas if I've got a 7-day turnaround, if I do Monday is clarity, reviews, clarity, preparation for the upcoming match. Tuesday's the big day, and then Wednesday, depending on individuals, we might do some off-feet active recovery aerobic session. Thursday's match specific. Friday, the captain's run is pretty small. It's just more clarity. And then we've got the game. That gives me 2 hits as opposed to a 3-1-1, you know. And if the problem I find is that a lot of teams, they get to day 5 or captain's run day, they haven't got enough load in, so they load up on that captain's run day anyway. And the whole reason for having, you know, the Thursday off was to prepare them for the match, and then you're sort of sabotaging it with a big Friday, you know, because that's 24 hours before you play. And that's my worry. And so I guess for me, that's my personal philosophy. And I know, and you know, there's a lot of really successful teams that do a 3-1-1 model, and it works for them. But I've tended to find in most of the teams that, like, I usually get brought in, you know, for a team that's just struggling a little bit and wants to, you know, up the ante a little bit. And so we need to do a little bit more work. And having 3 days in a row, I don't think is a good way of, in season, is a good way of doing that. So that's my little pet thing.
And have you ever had moments where you've changed that philosophy, perhaps maybe because the club is going through a development phase, or perhaps they're in the opposite, they're actually in a peaking phase, or whatever the scenario might be, or maybe they've got certain injuries in the group from key players that can't handle this particular program, and you've got to adjust it? Or is it more you can stick to the philosophy and it's just adjusting how it's executed or what's actually being done rather than the days?
I think obviously that's if you've got a 7-day turnaround, you know, and you'd probably do that with an 8-day turnaround as well. If you have a 6-day turnaround or a 5-day turnaround, you're only going to get one good session in the week. You know, that's the cost of that. Yeah. So obviously then is that you might have the clarity on day, you know, clarity, then you might do a good hit and then have a day off in captain's run. Or you might do it the other way. You might have clarity a day off and then do your moderate session and then the captain's run and then the game. So yeah, you know, the context, I guess, is important. I tend to find that the method works. One thing that we have done before is that sometimes in the preseason we might go 6 half days. And that's I struggle with that a little bit because I don't achieve all my physical goals. But I understand from a change-up perspective, if you do one mesocycle, say 3 weeks, sorry, of 6 half days, then that's good. You know, if the athletes tune up for that, then that's all good as well too. But yeah, I've done that. It's probably 3 or 4 teams that I've worked with that we've employed that for a mesocycle, just 6 half days. But they're busy half days, and there's six of them. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's a lot of frequency. What about double days? Have you ever experienced double dose days, AM PM sessions?
Yeah. When I first started in rugby, that was a thing, double days, and we did a lot of like Tuesdays. You know, with the Chiefs, we'd have well, Dave Rennie's sort of thing is that he wanted the whole thing to be men going to work, right? So blue collar men going to work. So we weren't allowed chrome in the gym. You know, it didn't. He didn't want it to look too like a commercial gym. It was men coming to work, and they would come in first thing in the morning and leave at 5 every day. And so Monday would be a full day, but they'd only be on the field once. Tuesday would typically be on the field twice, so units in the morning, team in the afternoon. Wednesday would have a walkthrough, and they might do a green session on the bikes. Thursday, not always a double day, often a single day, but sometimes double day. And then Friday would be captain's run. But that was a while ago, and you know, I know the Brumbies did something like that. But in New Zealand, it's pretty hard to do that. I know with Waikato, with the NPC team, when we won in 21, that's the model. Bones Joseph, who was the head of performance at that time, he employed that model pretty successfully. So yeah, I think with time, those double days, it's getting harder and harder to get them in. But I believe, I believe that's important, especially if you've got a young team and there's a lot of learning to go on. So yeah.
Sense. Awesome. Well, yeah, well aware of your time, Brett. It's been over 60 minutes. We'll start to wrap up the last few questions. First one's in your work life, anything that makes you angry, fires you up, pet peeves.
Oh. Geez, you've got some good questions, mate. Hey, pet peeves. Well, I don't really have any. So I guess because I'm an academic, I've kept working in academia. I guess the academic role is that we're always looking for opportunities to grow students. You know what I mean? And that's, I guess, why I'm an academic. So there'll be people that annoy me, but that's sort of an opportunity to support them for change, if you know what I mean. And as I said before,
Yeah.
sometimes if they annoy me, I'm just thinking, well, maybe they're the one. You know what I mean?
Yeah. 100%. Got to persist
So
with this character.
yeah, so I don't, yeah, no real pet peeves. Yeah,
Yep. What about favorite way to spend a day off?
surfing, mate. Whangamata bar, 3 to 4 foot, light offshore during the workday, when all the people who are supposed to be working are actually working, and so it's just me and a few.
Longboarding.
Oh no, short board.
Shot put.
Yeah.
Nice. Covering it up. Oh, good. And what about, you may have mentioned one already, I reckon you did early in the podcast, but what is one opinion or belief that you hold that goes against sort of mainstream thinking or challenges popular consensus?
I've probably got a few. I think we can work. I think we can create a periodized culture of hard work. I think there's an opportunity to grow our work culture in team sports. You know what I mean? And I'm not talking about 100% increase. I'm just talking about, um, you know, establishing mentality so that we're increasing the conditioning as we head towards the finals. And not front loading the season and then just letting it all go. I think that's an opportunity for growth. I also think specificity principle and game-based conditioning, I think that's massive. We've done, one of my students is just about to publish some work looking at the transfer of squats and counter movement jumps to 10-meter accelerations during a Super Rugby season.
Not good findings.
It's not good findings for those who think 6 sets of 6 of squats going to solve all problems. And I think people who've been in this business for a while know that if you've got someone young, you make them stronger and everything else increases. But there comes a point that if you want someone to accelerate, you need to work on acceleration. You're not going to solve that in the gym. So I think I'm working on that. Also, some of our scrummaging work, the union work as well. We've measured isometric force output, horizontal isometric force output, and it doesn't correlate well with squats because it's a different movement. So the last 6 years, I've sort of dedicated myself to the rugby union teams I'm working is looking at unstable isometric, horizontal unstable isometric work. And again, I did a little bit of work when I was with the Brumbies with Dan Palmer as the scrum coach up there. And he was doing all of this stuff before we even found his results out. So I think there's an opportunity for us to be. I'm not anti-weights. I'm not saying not to do weights. I think weights are important, but I think we need to mesh that in with some specific elements of that we're training for, acceleration, isometric strength, things like that. So I think that's important. Like I said, I think there's an opportunity now. We have the technology with the GPS for game-based conditioning. Wayne Smith calls it. Well, Wayne and I bounce this back and forth. We talk about preparing for war. Soldiers should always carry the weapon in preparing for war. Shouldn't leave the weapon behind and run up and down a hill. You need to be preparing for war. So you got a ball in your hand, and coaches have got to be part of that process.
Yep. And obviously the midway or over midway of this year, mate, what's on the horizon? What are you most excited about for the rest of 2025?
Skiing in Wanaka.
How good.
How good? Yep. Just need a little bit more snow, and it'll be just perfect. Yep. So that's on the immediate horizon,
Yeah,
and then yeah.
fantastic. Well, thanks again, Brett. I've got a couple of pages of notes here, as I do with every catch up that we have, whether it be a podcast or off air when we're planning some work at the Eels. But really appreciate you jumping on and diving into a field that we haven't discussed yet on the podcast, tactical periodisation. It's obviously been around for a while, but different sports have brought it on into their culture at different periods of time. So it seems to be growing traction, and it's good to share your story in your career so far. Thanks for jumping on and sharing with us some insights. For those that want to connect or have any follow-up questions, where's the best space to connect, mate?
Probably my email. Do you want me just to send you my email address through, or do you want me to read it out here?
Yeah, I can add it. That'd be good. Yeah. So so for those perhaps driving the car listening to the podcast, you can find Brett's email in the show notes. Thank you for everyone that's tuned in. If you tuned in late to this chat on YouTube, you can find it on our YouTube channel, the whole episode, and we're listening to our podcast over the next few weeks. Our next live chat is with Jared Hoare, who is a strength and conditioning coach at the Adelaide Crows, which will be 8 p.m. Australian Standard Time on Thursday, the 7th of August. So I look forward to seeing you guys then.